Thank you for joining us online here at Fam Church for this special Father's Day message. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button below to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And go out to Facebook at facebook.com/famchurch and give us a like. And now our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
Northern Wisconsin woods when I was 14 years old. Yes, we broke the law. I think that's what made it so exciting, was that I was 14. My dad took me out on a road and said, okay, go ahead, let's drive this car. Okay, and I'm not advocating here parents, dads, breaking the law to entertain your children. However, quite a few of my memories with my dad do involve breaking the law. Like, I remember the time he got this Camaro Z28, and he wanted to see how fast this thing would go because his speedometer went to 140. And how many of you, like me, if your speedometer goes to 140, your car must be able to do that, so you got to try to do that, right? I mean, isn't that right? Isn't that how it works? And so on these same northern Wisconsin roads, one day my dad said, let's see if this car will do 140. Well, he only got the car to 110 before he chickened out and slowed down, okay? And he could have gone faster, it would have gone faster, but he didn't. I think he was a little nervous because my dad is a guy who doesn't like to break the laws, especially the speed laws. And Diane is looking at me right now saying, how come you didn't inherit that from your dad? I don't know. And also, we weren't supposed to tell our mother about that situation. And so, Mom, if you're watching the video, now you know. Okay, Dad drove me and Steve 110 miles an hour in northern Wisconsin. But as I'm saying these things, thoughts are probably rushing through your minds. You're thinking of memories of your dad when you were a kid, or maybe even now as an adult, you've got some memories that are currently going on or have happened in the recent past with your dad, and it makes you feel good, and it makes you feel alive, and it's exciting. But some of you may be sitting there this morning and saying, you know what? I went back in that time machine. I opened up that app in my life, and guess what? There's nothing really there to remember. Because the memories of my dad are not something you want to remember, are not something that you want to honor today. And some of the mothers that are sitting here in the room, you ended up not just being the mother, but you ended up being the mother and the father to your children, which is probably one of the hardest things to do. And here's an interesting stat. Listen to this. On Mother's Day, the most calls in the United States are placed, okay? Everybody calls their mom on Mother's Day. On Father's Day, the most collect calls of any day are placed. So what does that say? No, but think about what this is communicating, though. Our mothers are worth paying for a phone call to talk to, right? Our fathers, yeah, we'll talk to them as long as they'll pay for the stupid phone call. I mean, that's kind of what we're communicating. And there just seems to be a breakdown. There seems to be a struggle. There seems to be a battle going on with fathers in our society. And it's had a real impact on our nation because we've been told a lie. We've been told the lie that fathers are replaceable, that mothers can do it all, but it's just not true. Listen to some of these stats. 71% of high school dropouts don't have a father at home. 71% of pregnant teen girls do not have a father in the home. 85% of children with behavioral disorders do not have a father in the home. 90% of homeless and runaway children do not have a father in the home. 63% of youth suicides do not have a father in the home. And 85% of the youth in prison do not have a father in the home. Those are incredible numbers. And it just shows the importance of the father in the home of each and every single person. And see, what happens is, though, we live in a culture that communicates to us that a father is not important. Think about some of the TV shows that are on, The Simpsons. Okay, who wants Homer as their dad? I don't think anybody would really want Homer as their dad. Or think about the show Family Guy. Okay, nobody would want Peter Griffin as their dad. But this is kind of the picture that they paint on all of the TV shows that are out there that involve families. The father is a buffoon struggling through life, and if he were to die or be taken out of the picture, it seems like the family would be in a better position, a better spot. The family would be happier. I mean, Family Guy, I'm not recommending this show. It's not something that I regularly watch, but if you've seen it, I mean, Peter, he treats his daughter horribly. Okay? He gives his oldest son horrible advice, and then when the kid's life falls apart, he laughs at him and makes fun of him. The only person that Peter Griffin likes is the dog in the house. The father is seen as dispensable. The mom is the only one who's competent. Just like in The Simpsons, Marge Simpson is the only competent adult in that house. But this is a lie. Because the father, according to the statistics we just read, is the most important piece of the puzzle in keeping our children headed in the direction we all hope and dream they will go. And this morning, I want to look at how we as fathers can be who God has called us to be, to lead our kids in the direction that they need to go. And for that, we are going to look in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 for some help and some wisdom. And I want to tell you this, if you're sitting here this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus and you're saying to yourself, oh boy, I can check out now because we're going to get some advice on parenting from the Bible, I guarantee you that if you take what we talk about in here this morning and apply it to your life and family situation, that things will be different. Regardless of whether or not you believe in the Bible, you are going to have something to take away from this message. And so let's turn to this. And so if you can open your Bibles, if you have a Bible, to 1 Thessalonians, and usually the first thing that jumps out at somebody when they see this book is the title of the book. I mean, think about it, Thessalonians, it's so long. Where does this come from? Well, this book is named after the people of the city of Thessalonica. Okay, the people from Thessalonica were called Thessalonians, just like people from Florida are called Floridians, or people from New York are called New Yorkers. What are people from Mulberry called, though? I was trying to figure this out. Are they Mulberrians or are they Mulberriers? Mulberrians? Okay, I just want to know that. And then I'm guessing somebody from Lakeland is a Lakelander, right? Is that okay? All right, so we're getting this. See, people from Ocala are Ocalans. And so we've got these little names. We've got this thing that we've made to kind of designate where we're from by taking the name of the city that we're from and kind of adding some stuff to it. And this is what happened here, This book was written to the people of Thessalonica, Thessalonians. And just a reminder, most of the books in the New Testament, they were letters written to a particular church at a particular time for a particular situation. Okay? And so like the book of Romans, it was a letter written to the church in Rome. 1st and 2nd Corinthians were two books written to the church in Corinth. 1st and 2nd Timothy were two letters written to Timothy. These books don't try to answer every theological question you can come up with, but what they do is they are targeting specific problems, specific issues, specific things that are going on in this church. And so 1 Thessalonians, what's going on here is that Paul, who wrote the letter, who founded the church, had a particular issue, a particular problem going on there in the church. The problem had to do with the end times, and Jesus is coming back. And so most of the letter has to do with Jesus coming back. But in this section that we are going to look at today, it's the personal comments that he makes before he gets into this theological debate that he's having with the people there about the coming return of Jesus Christ. And so this is what this is. This is personal commentary that Paul has made to the people there before he got into the actual meat of the letter. And there's some information that we need to know for what we are looking at for this to make sense. And the first thing that we need to know is this church, as I already said, Paul personally started this church. The starting of this church is found in the book of Acts chapter 17. And what happened was Paul, he was the first Christian that we know of to arrive in this city of Thessalonica. And the first thing he did was he went to the synagogue. If you don't know what a synagogue is, that's basically a Jewish church. And he met with his fellow Jews to tell them that the Messiah that they were looking for, this Messiah that they were searching for, had finally come, and his name was Jesus. And after Paul had told them about Jesus, it says in the Bible that some of the Jews believed, but more importantly, it says a large number of the God-fearing Greeks were Greeks who converted to Judaism, and some of the prominent women of the city converted. Suddenly, a large portion of this synagogue, instead of being at the synagogue and listening to what the rabbis had to say, now had decided that they were going to follow Paul and that they were going to start this thing down the road called a church, where they could worship Jesus. And as you can imagine, the Jewish leaders got kind of upset about this. I mean, picture it. You've got an organization. You've got something you're leading, okay? And you've got a bunch of people that are gathered around. And suddenly somebody walks in and they say something new. They say something different. And they say, hey, all you people that are following them, come follow me. And everybody just walks out on you and follows them. You'd be mad, right? I mean, I wouldn't be happy if somebody walked in here on a Sunday morning, burst through the doors and says, Jesus isn't the Messiah, the alligator outside is, come follow me, and you guys all ran out the door to follow the alligator. I'd be kind of mad, okay? And that's what was going on here. The Jewish leaders were mad. You know how mad they were? They went down to the market, and the Bible says they got some thugs to go beat these guys up, okay? So the thug life is not a 21st century invention, okay? The thug life's been around for centuries. And it was right here in the text. Well, they go looking for Paul and his traveling companion Silas. They can't find him, so they decide to arrest Jason, who was putting them up, who was letting them stay at their place. They take Jason, they put him in jail. Finally, they let Jason go because they don't have any charges against Jason. And then as soon as Jason gets out of jail, he runs home, he finds Paul, he finds Silas, and he says, you guys got to get out of town now because I got a group of thugs that are trying to come beat you up, and you're going to die if they get you. And so they snuck them out of town. And so in a very short time, Paul came in, started this church, and he had to leave. And this is where we're going to pick up now reading in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 10 through 12. And it says this, you are a witness, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live the lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. And so as I stated, Paul, he planted this church, but he immediately had to leave the area. So he was not there to continue the process of building this church up, get this church headed in the right direction. But because he was the one who started this church, he felt personally responsible for the church's growth. He basically saw this church as one of his children. Now, did Paul have real children? We don't know. He was a Pharisee. Most Pharisees were required to be married in order to be a Pharisee. We can assume he was married at some point in time. We don't know if he had children. We just don't know anything about his life. But he is there and he compares the church as children growing up. And this is a common theme with Paul. This is something he commonly does through the New Testament. He compares our life and walk with God with the physical growth of our bodies from birth all the way up until death, starting as infants and growing to adult maturity in Christ. He talks of the church like being a growing body, starting off young and immature and then growing into maturity. And then on a side note here, there is something really important that I want you to see. We need to see that there's a reason Paul talks about this journey of a follower of Jesus being like that of a person from birth to adult. The reason is this, okay? It's messy. It's messy growing into a mature follower of Jesus. We've got to understand this because so many people think that growing into a mature follower of Jesus is just like they get saved and then they just grow up and nothing messy ever happens. And if something messy happens, there's a problem there, but it's not true. Growing, giving birth to a church, giving birth to a new believer, giving birth to a child, it's messy. I mean, would you let anyone or anything give birth on your living room furniture? No? So Fluffy walked in and was pregnant, and Fluffy the cat laid down on your couch and started to give birth to a kittens. Would you just, oh, that's so cute, we're going to let Fluffy do that? How many of you just say, oh, that's all right, let Fluffy give birth on the couch? Heck no, right? Fluffy'd be out the door. Fluffy'd be on the lanai. Why? Because if Fluffy gives birth on our couch, we got to throw that sucker away, right? We don't want that. It's messy. Okay, but it doesn't stop with just the birth when it comes to a child or an animal, doesn't it? Does it? I mean, it's messy all the way along. Think of how many diapers you've had to change, okay? Think of how many vomit piles you've had to clean up off the floor. Think of how many blood spills you've had to clean up. I mean, think of all of this stuff. It's a messy. There's sicknesses to be cared for, and that's the way it is. Life and growing up and becoming mature is a very messy process. And Paul understands that becoming a follower of Jesus and growing in our faith is messy as well. Okay, there's going to be times when we're following Jesus that there's going to be aches, there's going to be pains, there's going to be some blood spilled. There's going to be times when we are following Jesus where we're going to get sick, where we're going to have setbacks, where we're going to have to clean up some messes, where things are going to go wrong, where things are going to go backwards, when things are going to not go the way that we think they will. And the same thing is true with a church. And since Paul knows that people growing in their faith to maturity and the church growing into maturity are very similar to a person's growth into maturity in life, he uses the same principles that he would with a child and offers the verses we just read below of how he is as a father to kids. And so what does Paul do? Okay, he does, first thing he does is he sets down some characteristics that he wants to be part of his life. This is what verse 10 says again. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. See, he had these three characteristics that he had in his life: holy, blameless, and righteous. And these were three characteristics that Paul wanted to put into the church, but he is also saying that these are characteristics that he would put into his children if he was being a father and being a parent and developing children. And I know it can be kind of hard to understand these terms because when we hear the words like holy, righteous, and blameless, a little bit of fear comes into us. Why is that? Because the people that we've seen in our lives that have been holy, righteous, and blameless have sometimes been a little weird, right? I mean, have we not run into the weird people who are holy that we go, whoa, that's a little strange. I don't know if I'm into that holiness. But we can think of things, we can think of situations, we can think of stuff that we've seen, like people who won't go to the movies because of holiness, or they won't play with playing cards because of holiness, or they won't go to a restaurant that serves alcohol because of holiness. And I knew one guy who thought that wearing a suit was a sign of holiness, and so he legitimately cut the grass in a suit because that's what it meant to be holy. I'm surprised the guy didn't die. I mean, think of how hot you'd get in a wool suit in Florida in the summer cutting the grass. That's crazy. But that's the picture we have in our head of these sorts of things. They've got a negative image. They've got a negative picture. And so when we hear stuff like that, we're just like, oh, I don't want anything to do with that. But holiness in how God desired it to be lived out is not something that's bad. Okay? Holiness in this case is a striving to live the life that God and Jesus had for him to live. It's about passionately pursuing God in every area of our life. Paul was not saying, I'm holy because I don't play with playing cards. I'm holy because I wear a suit when I cut the grass. I'm holy because I don't go to movies. That's not what Paul is saying here. He is saying that he is pursuing Jesus with all that he is. And he's not worried about what anyone else is doing. He's focused on what Jesus has for him and living that out. And that's what Paul is saying here when it comes to holiness. And so all of that other craziness that you've heard, all that other craziness that you've thought because that's what you were told by mature Christians, get that out of your brain. It's about pursuing Jesus passionately. That's holiness. The next thing that Paul is modeling is righteousness. And this is one I've touched on quite a few times because it was in the Beatitudes. And so if you've been here on Wednesday nights, you've heard this before, so kind of bear with me for those who haven't heard it. But righteousness, it's one of those big church words, right? It's one of those big church words that we just don't get. We hear it and we're like, wow, that's a big word. So if I say I'm righteousness or I've got righteousness in my life, it sounds kind of cool. And so we don't know what it means, but we just like it. It sounds cool. Well, righteousness in this case means living up to the standards of a relationship. We have a relationship with God, and that relationship has standards built into it, and there are things that we should do to keep the relationship good. And I think what many believers do is when they hear that, they automatically think to themselves, you know what, I need to open up my Bible because there's all kinds of lists in the Bible of things that I do and don't do. I take those lists, I put them in my pocket, I pull them out every day, and I check off to make sure I don't do that, and 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 that's living a righteous life. But that's not what he is saying here. At least I don't think so. I want you to think of it more along the lines of a relationship that you have with your spouse. If you love your spouse, if you care for your spouse, if you want the best for your spouse. Do you have to carry a note around in your pocket that says, do not cheat on your wife? And no, you don't, right? It just comes naturally to who you are. And that's what Jesus is saying, or that's what Paul is talking about here when he talks about righteousness. He's talking about something that comes out of the love relationship that we have with Jesus that just makes those things not even an issue. We don't have to sit there and carry around a list and say, you know what, I don't do this and I don't do that and I don't do this other thing, because it just flows out of us, because we love Him, because we care for Him, because we have this relationship with Him. It just makes following the list easy, and those desires that we have for doing those things that we know we're not supposed to do just kind of fall away, and we don't have to think about it. It's about building a love connection with Him, and as we do, we're going to become more and more righteous. And as we spend more time with Him, the desires that we have to do things that are in those lists are just going to fall away. As we spend time with Him, we're going to lose our taste for sin. We're going to lose our desire for sin. We're going to lose our passion for sin just because of how strong the connection is with God. That those things aren't just going to have, they're not going to have any interest to us, just like we wouldn't have any interest in cheating on our wife if we've got that good, that solid relationship. And so righteousness is about a strong, passionate pursuit of Jesus and what He is doing in our life. Then the third characteristic is blameless. And this is not Paul saying, hey, guess what? I'm blameless. I've never done anything wrong. I am the perfect person. No, he is saying that he strove to live a life so intently focused on Jesus that when he stands in the presence of God, there's going to be no evidence against him that his life was anything but centered on Christ. And see, that's the key when we hear this word blameless. That is the key to this word right here, is a life centered on Christ. And we've talked about that in the iDiscipleship series. I mean, Paul knew he didn't live a perfect life. If you know anything of the story of Paul, he was there and he ordered the execution of a Christian in Acts chapter 7. Paul says in one of his texts that he was the chief of all sinners. Okay, he knew that he was not righteous. He was not blameless in himself, that he was not perfect. But what he is saying here is that in being blameless, he is focusing himself on Jesus, made him the center of his life. And because of that, Jesus looks down on him and says, you know what? You are blameless because of how you are living your life. Will we be perfect if we live a blameless life? No. But God's not calling us to perfection. If God was calling us to perfection, we'd all be in deep trouble in this room, because none of us would be able to hit that mark of perfection. And I know that this is a struggle with many men, fathers, because we want to be perfect. I mean, I don't know. I want to be perfect. I want to be the perfect father. I mean, I don't know. One day on Facebook, I saw some dad was doing some cool stuff with his kid. They were taking pictures of all this stuff and framing them and putting them up on the walls of their house. And I said to whoever was in the office, I can't even remember who it was, I said, man, I'm a terrible father. Look what this person is doing. You know, I feel like, you know, I want to be perfect. And then what we say is, well, you know what? I can't be perfect, and so I'm going to strive after nothing. Holiness, righteousness, and blameless can be brought together under this idea to just center ourselves in Jesus, and we will be living all of these things out. But what's the point? So the point is this. Paul chose these characteristics to develop in his life: holiness, righteousness, blamelessness, and that is what he wanted to impart to the church in Thessalonica. Those were the things he thought were important enough to develop in himself, because he wanted his children and his spiritual children to see them in his life. And as fathers raising children, we need to do the same sort of thing. We need to choose characteristics in our life, and we need to take them and we need to put them into our children and develop them in those gifts. And if you're a follower of Jesus, I think these three that Paul mentions right here are perfect for us to use to pour into our children. Because we are living in a time when it's harder to find people, let alone men, who are willing to live holy, righteous, and blameless. Why? It's messy, as I already said. And it's hard to see progress. I love to see progress. I just always want to see things moving forward. And I got to tell you, when I don't see things moving forward, I get frustrated. I get aggravated. Man, see, we got this, because we don't have TV Dana's already laughing at this. Because we don't have TV, Dana's been buying puzzles at Walmart. Okay, my problem is that I have a hard time quitting anything. I mean, a really hard time. It's like, I'm just going to suck it up and keep pushing through till I do it. And she got this new puzzle, and last night it was just so frustrating. I just wanted to take the puzzle and burn it because there was no progress being made on it. And it was just like, oh, I hate this thing. I even went, oh, and the dog jumped and ran and got in the chair. But men like to see progress. We like to see things being built and come together. But our spiritual life, it's not that neat. It's not that clean. It's hard to see progress many times unless you look back over many years. I remember thinking 5, 6, 7, 10 years into my Christian life, man, I'm never going to get to a place that I want to be at in Christ. Okay? And now as I look back, I've been a Christian for, 24 years. And now I can look back and I can see all of the things that have happened, that God has developed in me. But it wasn't something that I could see along the journey, and that's very hard for me. And I assume that that's very hard for men. And so because of that, it makes it so hard to put forth and put these characteristics in our kids, because we see our kids, they'll take 1 step forward and 3 steps back and 1 step forward and 3 steps back, and we say to ourselves, for the love, why? And we just want to quit. We don't want to do it. But men, we are the most important influence in the lives of our children, and so let's give our kids something worth following, regardless of how messy, regardless of how difficult, regardless of how hard, or even not being able to measure it. Let's give our kids something worth following. Let's bring these characteristics out in them. Now, if you're sitting here this morning and you're not a Christian, you're saying, hey, this doesn't apply to me. No, I would challenge you to the exact same thing. Maybe you don't like these 3 character traits that Paul chooses. That's fine. Pick some of your own. Pick different character traits that you would like to see coming out in your kids. Characteristics that are going to help your child to become what you want them to become. But you have to remember something in all of this. If what you are showing them by your life is you are showing them you are cheating on your wife, if what you are showing them by your life is you're getting drunk and you're getting high, if what you are showing them by your life is that you blow a gasket every time something happens and you lose your temper, you are never going to show your kids what you want them to see. You are never going to be able to do it. I'm not trying to be a jerk here and make you feel bad, but if that's the direction you're going in, if this is the direction that you've been given from your parents and you don't know another way, God is here to say, you know what? Jesus can change that direction in your life. Jesus can take and make your direction something that your kids are going to look back on and say, thank you, God, for saving my father and having him develop these characteristics and qualities in me. And in a few minutes, we're going to give you the opportunity to make a commitment to Christ. So first, Paul developed himself and his character to be the best father possible. And he worked those out in his daily life through this, verses 11 and 12. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So let's look a little closer at encouraging, comforting, and urging. First, encouraging. This word is a heartfelt word and not a one-time shot in the arm to make somebody feel better. It's the strong support and trust that imparts courage into others. Paul built up his church by being an encouragement to them, by imparting something that gave them energy and strength to overcome those trials and tribulations that they were facing. And God is calling each one of us as fathers to do the exact same thing. He is calling us to be an encouragement to them, to be somebody who lifts up our kids, who lifts up our children. Now, does this mean that we tell them when they've done a great job when they haven't, or when they've made a complete mess out of a situation, we say, oh, it's all right, it's all right? No, he's not saying that. He's saying encouragement is where you look at the reality of the situation. You look at the reality of the spot that you are in, where you acknowledge that you blew it, and you let them know that they can overcome a situation no matter how bad it is. Okay? It's not helping them or doing what you can to get them out of the situation. They have to take the risks and do what it needs to be done in order to overcome the situation, but we are there to encourage. We are there to lift them up. We are there to tell them, you know what? This looks like a mess. This looks all screwed up, but you can make it through it. The second thing there is comforting. This is the gentle empathy which comes and stays alongside as they experience the failures and distresses of life. And Paul knew that they were going to fail. Paul knew that they were going to screw up. Paul knew that bad things were going to happen, but instead of ditching them when it happened, he stayed alongside of them the whole time, letting them know it was going to be okay and that they were going to make it through this. He didn't try and solve the problem for them. He walked them through it. He coached them. He taught them. He encouraged them. And this is the challenge for us as fathers, to do the same thing with our kids. When our kids fail, when they experience distresses, we don't abandon them. During that time, we offer our comfort in letting them know it will be okay, but we don't try and solve their problems for them. We know a family who should remain nameless because videos go online, but it's not in this church. We knew a family who their daughter worked at a restaurant, and she was 20 years old, and the family always took care of whatever distress, problem, situation arose. Well, one day, she was working at this nice restaurant. It was a nice restaurant. It was in Gainesville. And the University of Florida lacrosse team came in. Well, according to her, the University of Florida lacrosse team was mean and rude to her. And so how did she handle it? By calling her dad. How did her dad handle it? By calling first the manager of the restaurant and then calling the University of Florida lacrosse coach to demand a formal apology from the team for how his daughter was treated. That is probably not the way when your child gets into a tough situation to handle it. They need to learn to be able to overcome those situations, and we can be there to be a comfort if they feel like they've been treated wrong, but we need to encourage them to push through these situations and work through as the solutions. And Rob, if you could come on up, Paul finally urges them to live a life worthy of God. In urging someone to something, we are persistent. In urging someone to something, we are persuading. In urging someone to something, we are advocating. What was Paul advocating? He was advocating for the people of Thessalonica to live a life worthy of God. He wanted them to live like him, with Jesus at the center of everything. He wanted them to live with the same passion for Jesus. He wanted them to live with the same fire for Jesus. He wanted them to live with the same everything in them for Jesus. So he constantly urged them. He was persistent, he was persuading, and he was advocating for a life centered on Jesus. And as fathers, that should be our heart as well. But the only way we are going to be a successful advocate for a life worthy of Jesus is if we are living it ourselves. Fathers, we need to be constantly searching our hearts and searching our lives and asking ourselves, are we living the life that we want our kids to see? Are we living the life that sets the example for them, that makes our kids say, I want to follow Jesus because of what happened with Dad? Or are we living one life and saying, but you need to follow Jesus with yours? That'll never work. It'll never work. We are not going to see something different in our kids because we want it to be that way, because we prayed and asked God to make it that way, or because we force our kids to be that way. The only way we're going to see that is if we model it, if we live it each and every single day. Have Jesus at the center of everything. And in that, as we live it out, dads, we're going to see our kids see that, and they're going to want to be a part of that. Because see, here's one thing I know, is that everyone who's in this room who is a father or about to be a father wants to be a great father. I have never met anyone who said, yeah, I want to suck at being a dad. Never, ever have I met anyone who said that. And here's the thing, if we take what we've learned today, if we take these principles and apply them to our lives and our situation, if we're determined to see those characteristics develop in our kids, I think God will honor that and do something. So my challenge is for all of us to be great fathers like that. And some of you may be saying to yourself, well, you know what? It's just too late. My kids are older. It's never too late. It's never too late to stop and change direction. It may take more time. It may take more convincing with your kids. But I guarantee you, if you live this out, if you make this a part of your life, that it's going to influence and impact your kids in ways that you could never imagine. And ultimately, it'll be worth it. It'll be totally worth it.
I really hope you enjoyed that special Father's Day message from Fam Church. If you did, please click the like button below and let us know. And don't forget to go out to myfamchurch.com where you can learn everything about us here at Fam. And thank you again for joining us online here at Fam Church.